This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. My name is Larry Smart. I'm a professor in the horticulture section in the School of Integrative Plant Science. This year, just to give you an overview of the agenda, and I did print out enough hard copies of the agenda for everyone, but there is a QR code that will take you online, and we have the agenda, and all of our handouts are online. Because we do that because I used to print out 125 or 150 handouts and end up with 100 left over at the end. So we do have 25 hard copy printouts of our handouts, and we'll be distributing those as each speaker comes up to the mic. And if you do want to look at a hard copy handout, share and look over each other's shoulders. So in the morning, we are going to talk about this. We're going to start with our update from New York State Ag and Markets, Tim Sweeney, who's our program director. And then we will talk about this variety trial. And then we will shift down to the next stop and talk about some establishment management techniques, seed treatments, weed management, and rolling. And then hopefully the Bish fiber cut is running. And we will see how well that's working. So, and we're going to move on. Maciej Kowalski is here from Poland. He's going to talk about some of the different aspects of retting, in particular for textile fiber quality. Then we will have a pretty cool demo of a Monarch electric tractor. And finally, we'll end up the morning demonstrating our McHale baler. So then we will all drive down to our new hemp processing facility that we call the Hemp Tent. It's a fabric barn, and we will have a delicious rusty pig lunch in the Hemp Tent. And in the afternoon, we will see if we can get our decorticators running, and then we'll end the day with an array of hemp industry professionals and entrepreneurs from New York State. So I hope it's a stimulating event. We have a lot of people from across the country here attending, academics, industry members, processing folks. So it should be a nice networking event. The last thing I want to say is that everything may not go great. We've broken a lot of stuff in the last week and have been scrambling, especially my new research support specialist, Jacob Bish, has been putting in long hours trying to get things repaired in time for today. They may not work perfectly, but it will be real. So it may not be great, but it will be real. And that reflects where we are in the hemp industry right now, especially on the processing side. So bear with us. If you have some suggestions to make things work, let us know. Okay, I'm going to hand over the mic to our long-standing and good friend at New York State Ag and Markets. They have been incredibly supportive of our research programs, and but Tim also manages our hemp growers, and he's going to give you a little update and answer any questions you have. So, Tim.
So I'll be the first thing that may not work great. My presentation's on a PowerPoint. We have no screen, so that's okay. So we've been running the hemp licensing program since 2022. It's the current iteration of it. It's no longer a pilot program. And we were granted that authority by the USDA. Hemp still remains a heavily regulated crop, and you must be licensed by the state in order to grow it. The license fee is $500, and you have to have a FBI background check. You can have no felony drug-related convictions within the last 10 years. in order to get a license. If you do, you would be disqualified. I don't want to take a lot of time going through the minutia of the program because I don't think there's probably a lot of growers here. I'm here with Chuck Schmidt, my colleague somewhere around. We'll be here all day, so if you have any particular questions, if you are a grower, you can hunt us down and we will talk to you one-on-one. If you are a licensed grower, there's some things that you need to remember. If you haven't yet done a planting report, you need to get that into us. They have to be in by the end of the year. They're supposed to be in within 20 days of planting. Even if you're not planting, you still have to do it. There's a box to check that says you're not planting, but if you don't get it into us, you run the risk of having to enter into a corrective action plan, which is just a lot more paperwork for you. So you don't want to do that. Also, if you're a grower and you're about to harvest, you need to submit a pre-harvest report with us. They need to be sent in 30 days before your intended harvest date. And then you would, on that form, you would choose your sampling agent and a lab that will do your testing for you. We no longer do the sampling and testing as an agency. We just don't have the capacity. So that is the grower's responsibility. We have 28, I believe, certified sampling agents and 24 recognized labs that you can work with to fill those responsibilities. Sorry about this. So the grower's license is good for 3 years. That's the $500 fee you pay is good for a 3-year license. And since the program started in 2022, that means that licenses are going to be expiring next year. They'll start to expire. If you're a grower, you'll be getting a 90-day advance notice that you need to get your license renewed. We will be doing individualized notification to everybody as their license comes up 90 days out. And unfortunately, I checked with the USDA. You do have to do another background check for the new license. The background check can be no more than 60 days old when you apply, when you send in your application. Applications have to be mailed in. They can't be taken electronically for some reason. They don't let us do that. There's another $500 fee for the renewal. And this is, these are just caveats that I say every year. If you're planning to grow hemp, know where you're going to sell the hemp. Have a market before you plant the stuff. We have people every year, they plant it, then they call us at harvest time. What am I going to do with this? We don't broker hemp. We don't have a way to set you up with buyers. So know where you're going to sell it before you plant. Also, zoning is a local issue in New York State. Check the zoning where you're going to grow. You can't grow in a residential area unless it's also zoned for agricultural uses. You can't grow in a residence or an attached garage. Know the characteristics of the plant you're growing, of the varieties you're growing. If it's got a tendency to go hot, stay away from it, because if it goes hot, it's not going to be any good to you. You'll have to destroy it or remediate it in some way, and the remediation pretty much makes it invaluable, or not of any value. And because we're still operating under the 2018 Farm Bill, we have not had a new Farm Bill yet. The 0.3 total THC remains the standard for industrial hemp, no more than 0.3%. We were hoping for a Farm Bill last year. I don't think we're going to get one this year. So we'll see if next year, if we get a Farm Bill, perhaps there will be some changes. I haven't heard of anything coming. So, of any changes coming, and I haven't heard of any progress on the Farm Bill. So. If anybody have any questions now, I can take them, or we can wait till later.
Does New York exempt certified varieties from compliance testing?
We have a list of varieties, yes, that are exempted from testing. And there's you have the potential of being inspected once in your 3-year period. You will be inspected, sometimes more. The testing the sampling, certain varieties can be exempted from it, others will not. If they have a tendency to be kind of hot, if they've been hot in the past, you're going to have to sample those.
When do you sample for compliance testing? How many days before harvest?
So if the question is when do we sample for compliance testing, 30 days out from your anticipated date of harvest, send in your pre-harvest report with the name of your sampling agent. We then generate a chain of custody form that would get sent to your sampling agent, and they would call you. You'd set up your sampling date, so it's 30 days out from your anticipated harvest is when the sample's taken.
Is it total THC?
The question is it total THC? Yes, it's total THC.
Any other questions?
Great. Like I said, Chuck and I are here most all day, so hunt us down if you have other questions.
I have one final question. So if a field exceeds the 0.3% limit, you have the option to remediate it and retest it, right? One of my colleagues told me that retesting and remediation does not apply if you are growing for seed for planting. Is that true?
You always do this, Larry. Chuck?
Well, I would say that seed crops generally don't go hot. Most of the CBD crops are what we've seen that go hot. They go to seed.
So we did have a seed crop go hot last year.
Right, and we did let him harvest that, and so that, I think we probably would take that on a case-by-case basis and see what varieties they're talking about, how hot it is. You know, we were to remediate it. You have to chop it up pretty much and make it a homogeneous mass, and the seed would have been lost, and we didn't want that to happen. So. We did allow that to go.
Okay.
You know, we're trying to not. We want people to be successful. We don't want to get people unnecessarily in trouble or have to destroy their crop for minute problems. But we are beholden to the USDA. If we get audited and we have something wrong, we could threaten the whole program. So yeah, and you also, like I said, make sure you're not growing varieties that tend to go hot, because if a field is hot, it will have to be destroyed if it can't be remediated. And if you haven't sent in your planting or your pre-harvest report and you've harvested it without it being sampled, it will be destroyed.
Yeah, Valerie's asking. You mean if it tests hot? If it tests hot, can you use the material as a source for biochar, for example?
Yeah, if you could, whatever you do with the biochar to make the hemp irretrievable and no, not usable for illicit purposes, yeah, I think that'd be okay.
Okay.
What was the question?
What is your means of remediation?
What is the means of remediation?
Chuck, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, generally,
Thank you. Yeah, for remediation, we generally ask that the flower be removed and then the remainder of the crop be chopped up into a biomass. The flower can be chopped up in that as well. So we dilute it with all the leaf material, all the stem material, and then we send another sample to the lab, and most likely it's going to be tested fine. The problem is now you have this product you have to sell. Right? What do you do with that? I'm not sure.
Do you have like a window of days that it has to be remediated within?
Yeah, like anything else, once we find it's hot, we've got 10 days to tell us what you're going to do with it. Usually I talk to you and talk about some of the options that you have. We chop it up. Do you have a market for that? Because then you have to get it retested at your expense. So you want to throw good money after bad. If you don't have a use for it, then it's better just to compost it or till it in or something.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Tim.
You bet.
So, growing, yeah, thanks a lot, Jim and Chuck. They have been incredible partners. They are our partners in this endeavor. And as Tim said, they want to see farmers succeed. But having said that, evaluating the cultivars that you're growing, and my advice would be to grow compliant cultivars, cultivars that have a long history of being compliant under the current rules. So that is something that we have been doing in our field trials for the last 7 years, is evaluating varieties, testing them for compliance, and doing the fundamental research to understand the genetics of why those varieties produce THC. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. It is now really critical that you grow compliant varieties if you want to enter hemp seed meal into the animal feed market. So that has been an incredible event in the hemp industry, is federal approval, AgToGo and FDA approval of hemp seed meal as a feed ingredient for laying hens. With the caveat being that that feed definition has some pretty low limits for THC and CBD, so that hemp seed meal cannot have greater than 2 parts per million total THC or more than 20 parts per million total CBD. Obviously those seeds are not making THC. It would be residue that would be rubbing off in the bin of the combine or through the harvesting process. But right from the outset, you want to be growing varieties that produce low amounts of THC. This year, you're going to see that our field day is really focused on fiber. And a lot of those fiber varieties do produce THC. So that's not an issue for the hemp seed meal, obviously, but it's something that my graduate student, Luis Monserrate, is going to talk about. So Luis is going to give you about a 15-minute overview of 15 or 20-minute overview of his research and the trial behind me here. And then we want to give you some time to walk through the trial, ask any questions, follow up with Luis on things that he's saying, and then we are going to meet at that speaker over there at 9:50. Right? Okay. So Luis, it's all yours.
Thank you, Larry. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all again. Recognize many familiar faces. Great attendance. Is that good? Okay, perfect. So I always ask this question when I give my talk. Who in here is wearing or has any hemp fiber piece of clothing? Oh, lower than last year. That's unfortunate. If you ever need a good hat, I would highly recommend this hemp hat by Tiley, I believe. 100% hemp fiber. So I will encourage the industry once again. Yeah, so my name is Bish Monserrate. I'm starting my 4th year in this PhD program with Larry, focusing on fiber and grain breeding and genetics. And you know, as you saw yesterday, the USDA, characterization of germplasm is important, right? So in order to do any of the breeding and genetics, we need to explore these cultivars, we need to characterize them. I want to characterize phenotypically and genotypically. So right now I want to show you my phenotypic characterization here. So this characterization is not new. It has been done for many years. If I'm not mistaken, a century ago, Lister started doing this in 2012, I believe. And he started characterizing germplasm from Italy, from China, and started introgressing some of those traits in that germplasm. In the Netherlands in 1994, they did something similar, assessing 163 accessions, and that was a multi-site trial. In 2020, I believe, they assessed 123 accessions the same university, Wageningen University, and they did an international assessment comparing performance in the Netherlands, in Italy, and in France. So this is not new, but this is very imperative to know how the cultivar performs and what are the interesting traits there are. So again, characterization is important. At the USDA, you saw very cool traits. If you walk around the field, you saw certain interesting phenotypes, certain traits, certain leaves, certain inflorescences, certain monachi. That was very interesting. So that's what we are seeing here. We're also assessing that in a production scale instead of a high planted density, how the cultivar will perform in a commercial setting. To do that, we decided to do a dual that is on your right side and a fiber that is on your left side. The fiber was planted at a density of 1.87 million plants per acre, I believe. 1.31 million plants per acre, and the dual was of 180,000 plants per acre. I'm sorry, I use metric units. I'm trying to convert to the imperial system. Yeah, so as you can see, the stand count is very important for us because for fiber we want to minimize the stem diameter. So we have heard from processors that they don't want something that is thicker than an inch or something that is, the diameter of a pinky. And for the dual, what we want is to maximize the herb production as well as the grain production. So we should actually enable that branchiness, or a little bit of branchiness for the yield of grain. But I think it is important to know that there are advantages and disadvantages based on the type of cultivar that you use, the market classes that you use. So I would like to discuss with you about that. For example, there are two sexual difference expressions in cannabis. There is the dioecious and the monoecious. So if we have a dioecious crop, there are advantages and disadvantages with it. One dicen that has been approved and corroborated, well, I would say approved, sorry, corroborated by a group in Italy from 2022, I believe. They observed that male plants have a higher fiber quality than female plants. So in that case, when you have a dioecious population, then before the females flower, you, objectively speaking, should get better fiber yield. Now, this assessment has not been done comparing such yield with a monoecious, and it makes it challenging because you have to ensure you have the same genotypic background except the sexual differentiation, right? So, but for now, we can say that in a dioecious population, the males at least will have a higher fiber quality. With the monoecious, the idea is that that fiber quality should be more homogeneous, if you will, right? Because it will be the same individual. However, if you walk around and you see the monoecious individual, there will be a few males over there. It's typical to see between 5 to 10% of the population having males. Another important characteristic with the monoecious and dioecious is the ease of harvest. If you have a dioecious population and you harvest for grain, that will be at seed maturity. By that time, in a dioecious population, the males will be senesced and will be redded. So it is probable that that male will clog your combine. And I heard that before, and sometimes happens. Sometimes it wraps up and starts heating up in the combine, smoking and stuff. So it could be a challenge. So that's why sometimes monoecious is better. Now, if you look at the monoecious individual, I know and I acknowledge there are different types of monachi. There are different inflorescence types when you talk about monoecious. But the European monoecious, in my opinion, has these clusters of male flowers that eventually senesce and they stay on the female plant. So this is decaying material in the inflorescence where the grains are going to be harvested for human consumption and consumption are going to be. So that is a little microenvironment for a potential pathogen growth. And maybe some of you know, if you have Fusarium graminearum there, you may have omatoxin there. So I don't know if that will be the case, but it's a hypothesis I have that could be a potential issue with a monoecious individual in that sense. The other question that I have about the differences or a trade-off is grain yield. And again, we have to ensure that we have the same genotypic background except the sexual expression, but are monoecious plants producing more yield than a dioecious population? I mean, you would think so, right? Because you have more than 50% of the plants being female. If you have a monoecious population, you will objectively have more grain. But it's something that we need to assess because there are many confounder factors such as late flowering, branchiness, but that's another thing to consider. Maybe monoecious, if the plant is typically identical but is monoecious, maybe it has more grain. I believe that New West Genetics has kind of like that train of thought a little bit with their one of their hybrids. Another parameter, the important trait that we characterize and we try to make sense of is the flowering time. And there are advantages and disadvantages with them, and I would like to discuss those with you. So for fiber, what do we want? A late flowering, right? Because we want to accumulate as much stock as possible. However, during the Pennsylvania field day, I was told that for that specific processor, they don't want more than 4 to 6 feet tall plants. So I don't know. But if you have a taller stem, you will have more bast running along the main stem. Obviously, you start accumulating more hurt, but when you have a late flower, you're able to accumulate that vegetative growth over time, accumulate more bast. You have an early flowering one, that will not be the case. Another interesting thing is the ease of harvest when we're looking at early and late flowering. If you have a late flowering for grain, for example, that plant will be very big, that you will need very expensive and very difficult to obtain piece of equipment such as the Hemp flax double cut, right? If you want to have a dual purpose. But if you have an early flowering, you need a regular combine that you can, easily harvest. For the fiber, you may need a fiber cut or a sickle bar. Shouldn't be a problem. But I think that you need to reach certain height for that to work, because you can have 4 bars on that fiber cut. So you can just use the sickle bar. One challenge that we have observed is the scale-ups. Late flowering cultivars and early flowering also is a very important step or a very important characteristic for us as breeders to utilize to scale up breeding lines or cultivars. If we have a late flowering cultivar, it makes it really challenging to produce seeds here, because by the time that the seeds are maturing, we have a frost and we lose all our seeds. So it makes it very difficult when it flowers very late. So then we have to play with other characteristics. Either, okay, we can grow at southern latitudes, okay, but Florida, there's a hurricane, everything goes to hell, right? So it makes it very, very difficult. However, there are other parameters that we can look into, such as the juvenile phase of the plant. We have observed that certain germplasm, once it's grown at a very short day length, it will take a while to flower. It wouldn't flower like in 2 weeks. Some do in 2 weeks, but some will take a month, 20 days, 6 weeks. And that is very good because it allows us to have a growth that is big enough for a regular combine to use when it's grown so we can grow in Yuma, Arizona in November, September, December. So it's a good environment for it, but not all cultivars perform that way. So we need to assess germplasm to see that juvenile phase or that sensitivity to the critical day length. And just a little sidebar here, when you're looking at day length, I will encourage you to include the civil twilight in your measurements. Civil twilight also prevents flowering. There's a group out of University of Florida observed this and reported this, and I have been able to track down and accurately compare my day length from the field into a grow chamber, and I have observed those. So I would encourage you that whenever you're doing measurement using day length, include civil twilight time. Weed competition is another important phenotype to look into for our germplasm, and that would be probably late to early flowering, but I would say that seedling vigor and leaf area is another important parameter for the weed competition. So we want germplasm that will have a growth rate very high, that will be able to compete with the weeds. Leaf area that's going to be very large, that we're able to shade those weeds out. And you can see that in some of those, like there is no weed whatsoever. Obviously, we spray Sonolin here, but last year we didn't spray Sonolin, I believe, and we had a very nice weed competition for some cultivars. And an additional trait that I'm looking into, which I think is very important, and for some of you might be more than obnoxious comments for me, is seed size. Because what we have observed that seed size does, it seems to be a higher proxy for seedling vigor. At least the germplasm that we have used, that we have tested with large seeds, have large leaves, which allow us to compete with the weeds. Preliminarily speaking, from a pilot study that we did, we have observed that larger seeds are able to perform better in processing for dehulling, so that's good as well. But I do acknowledge that the challenge is when you're getting a pound of seeds, you're getting fewer seeds. That's a problem. I understand that. But I think that the counter argument for it is that you will essentially need fewer seeds to reach your stand establishment because the seedling vigor is going to be so high. When you have lower seeds, you need more seeds in a bag. Sorry, you will have more seeds in a bag, but you will use a lot of those seeds, and some of those will be self-thinned, or the crop is not going to compete with the weeds. So what's going to happen in the harvest? Your bales are going to be full of weeds, which may decrease the quality, and your seeds may have a lot of weeds, a lot of weed seeds in it. So I think seed size should be, I mean, we have done it with corn, so I think the same thing can be done with hemp, and I think it's a good trait to explore, and I'm constantly exploring. But what is the other characteristic of, hemp, or phenotype of trait that we care the most? I think Tim was very clear about one of them that makes hemp, legally speaking, the THC. So, and that's the perfect segue for what we are going to move on, and that is selection for populations, breeding lines / cultivars that will be consistently below the 0.3% THC limit per dry weight. And that's what we have done for our breeding lines, Orsa Alta and Orsa Grande. You will see other two here, 1380 and 1143. These cultivars and breeding lines were actually selected for the lack of production of THC, or to reach a limit below the 0.3 THC. So this was done with market assisted selection developed by our lab, and we can ensure you that when you are growing this cultivar, by the time of sampling and you're harvesting, you are not going to exceed that limit. And we have consistently observed that, have been certified by a third-party lab. So, and we'll have done the same thing for 1142 and for 1380. And I will encourage you all to look at the handouts, and we can see our potential yield in a small plot trial. And I understand it's a small plot trial, it's not a street trial. But we're able to reach about 20 metric tons per hectare, which is like 8 US tons per acre. And for your understanding, the average of fiber yield last year was reported in the USDA hemp report. It was 2 tons per acre. So that was the average. And for Ursa Grande, which is another cultivar, in this case we are promoting this as a dual purpose, so we can get grain out of it as well as the herd. We're able to get about 6 US tons per acre, and we're able to get 1,000 pounds per acre of grain. Again, the average last year was 558 pounds per acre. So what I'm giving you is numbers that should encourage you to pursue hemp and looking into the future and perhaps getting interested in other cultivars as well. But again, I think more importantly is to test this recurrently and to observe these yields and this performance consistently year after year, and not just in the same location but across the U.S. And in the handout for our webinar, you can see also the yields in Kentucky, Ithaca, Kentucky, North Carolina, Texas, and Florida. So with that, you can determine what your best cultivar could be, not just for fiber, but also for grain. One trait that I feel like I'm forgetting is the fiber quality one, which is bast content. This bast content has been improved since 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. Right now, you can see one of those, which is fiber 79. This was reported, this yellow stem or bright stem was identified in the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken, by a German group. They call it bright stems. This trait is very interesting because they have observed in 2018 other germplasm, I think Carnaleonti, Ivory, Markant, that has produced higher bast content after decortication compared to green stem. In 2023, if I'm not mistaken, another group assessed the performance of fiber 79 with Futura 75, and they observed a difference. They observed that fiber 79 was 37.5% bast content, whereas Futura 75 was 29.3%. I have seen crazy numbers as well in all the groups out of Latvia. They observed like over 42% bast content, which is insane, but they have done it allegedly. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that this characterization of cultivars have allowed other people and have allowed us to improve our yields, to improve the traits that we believe are going to be more adept for the industry as well as for growers, processors, industry in general. And I think that we're heading that way, and we have more breeding lines in the pipeline trying to assess, to ensure that we are not exceeding the limits for hemp seed meal, to have high seed size, or great seed size, to ensure a uniform flowering time, to make sure that we have that parameter of distinct, uniform and stable to meet as a cultivar, so that we can have that certification of seeds. And I guess this is all I had to say, and those are my 15 minutes. So yeah.
I'm sorry. That does not go hot. None of our varieties are essentially zero THC. They will not go hot. And our varieties will be submitted for plant variety protection this fall.
I have another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, when is the right stage to harvest? For example, like fiber type, and also you have dual purpose type. So, when is the good time to harvest? Before flowering or?
The question is, what's the best time to harvest for fiber and dual purpose cultivars? So for fiber, it has been widely researched for many years in Europe. The ideal time to maximize yield and minimize quality loss, and that is at the onset of female flowering. So you are able to have those to stretch out your height, your stem length as much as possible, but minimizing the lignification that happens during flowering, female flowering. So that will be the time. So what I do is, because I do not immediately believe that every single cultivar is 50-50, I just rate percentage of flowering overall, and whenever I see at least 50% flowering in my population, I decided that that's time to harvest for fiber. For a dual purpose, so it is interesting because we have more issues and the issues, and I have to have a criterion that will fit both of them. So what I do is I rate flowering again on a weekly basis. Once I reach 80% flowering, that will ensure that for a monoecious population, most of them are flowering, and for other issues, I have more than half of the females flowering, right? And from that point, I track between 6 to 8 weeks after that point for seed maturity into harvest. And I have observed consistently that it seems to be around 6 to 8 weeks. It doesn't really change. I mean, it changes within those 6 to 8 weeks, but that's around the time when you should have it for dual purpose.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Hi. Or is there somebody already? Hi, Luis. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering about Ursa alta. Other than its short critical day length threshold, what other characteristics make it special for New York farmers? You mentioned the mean dry redded yield of Ursa at different latitudes, and it actually did pretty well in Kentucky too. So I was wondering if you could talk about more what are the specific characteristics of Ursa alta other than its critical day length threshold that make it special for New York farmers.
Yeah, so let me just broaden that question a little bit. The question is about what is so special about Ursa alta. So we have, using marker-assisted selection from very late flowering land races from China, we have selected these two cultivars. We trademarked the name Ursa, which is the Latin name for bear. That's our mascot. So all of the varieties that we produce in our Cornell breeding program will be trademarked with that Ursa name. And these first two cultivars were developed with funding from the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research and matching funds from International Hemp, and they have been licensed exclusively in the U.S. to International Hemp for distribution and seed production. And we call them Grande. Grande has large seeds. Luis is very fond of large seeds. And Alta is an exclusively fiber variety. We cannot produce seed of that variety in New York. So Luis, what is so special about Alta?
Well, I don't know who of you attended the USDA, but my lab mate, Lucia Viñale, said that apparently is resistant to both Fusarium and, sorry, not Fusarium, Septoria and powdery mildew from her screening. So that's very encouraging and very exciting, to be honest. So that makes it special, I would imagine. If you look at the plant also, to me the leaf area makes it very special, because what I believe is that you can decrease the stand count or the plant intensity and you still have a good weed competition and narrow stem. So that leaf area makes it competitive compared to other commercially available cultivars such as Futura 83. The leaf area is much larger than Futura 83. So I would say that makes it special as well. Likewise, Ursa Grande is also large, has large leaves.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, a couple of other things. So we have not had the opportunity yet to determine decortication efficiency and bast yield, but we collaborate with David Suchoff at North Carolina State University, and I believe our varieties are among the highest in bast fiber yield among the varieties that he tested in similar small plot trials. So we highly value that collaboration with North Carolina State, and they have an excellent College of Textiles there where we will be able to assess fiber quality of these new emerging varieties. Other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you want them very thin. Is it because the bast fiber ratio? Is it because the equipment is not there for thicker, or is it both? Why?
Well, I would say both. One is because of the ratio. The thicker the stem, the lower the bast to her ratio. But also, if you have a stem that is a whole trunk, you will not be able to decorticate. From what I heard from I think one professor was that if the stem is wider than an inch, it will not decorticate. So you cannot process a high cannabinoid stem, for example.
But it's because the equipment is not there.
I think it's because of I believe it's because of the bast to her ratio. You will get more hurt than bast, and ultimately also the equipment.
Tyler.
Tyler.
How are you harvesting these plots?
Yep. Tyler is asking how I'm harvesting these plots. So what I do is I harvest 1 square meter that should be representative of the entire pass. So if you walk around, you will see some holes in the middle. That's where I place my quadrant and harvest everything in it. So that allows me to determine a yield based on that specific 1 square meter. Yep. Question over there?
What trace did you use markers for when you were reading the
Can you repeat the question?
The question is,
you used the molecular markers for when you were doing a reading for the Ursa?
Oh. So for marker seed selection, we did chemotype for chemotype 3 solely. So we'll have only these 2 alleles that will produce mostly CBD. And then the other selection criterion that we used was flowering time to make sure that it's within one window of it doesn't flower like for several weeks, but also like uniformly, like in, I don't know, like let's say like in 2-3 weeks you have everything flowering or something like that, as opposed to flowering over several weeks, and a specific flowering time when we want those to flower. So for example, Rosa Alta will be harvested, I believe, between early and mid-October. That's the window that we chose for it.
yeah, so just another point about flowering time and what we've been harvesting here. So as you drive around, you're going to see some fields that have already been harvested, redded, raked. We're going to demonstrate raking and baling some of those. We're going to walk down and look at Carminecta, where the harvester is. We're going to run the fiber cut through that Carminecta. And for fiber, that field has already gone past. The males have already senesced. And if you were harvesting for fiber, you're too late. It's just about perfect right now if you were going to do a dual purpose harvest, because the grain is mature in that variety. So the French varieties, such as Future 83 and Fibreur, were ready to harvest, about 3 weeks ago?
Yep.
For fiber. And as Luis said, Ursa Alta won't be ready for another 3 weeks.
Yep. Which is ideal.
So it continues to accumulate biomass over that time because of its late flowering nature. Yeah, so the last point I want to make is that these small plot trials have been organized by my colleague Bob Pierce at University of Kentucky, and we all work together under the organization of a USDA program, which is called a multi-state program, and that particular hemp research project is called S1084. And you can Google that, S1084 Hemp Research, and our project objectives and some of our initial results will come up when you Google that. But these types of plots are replicated, I think, this year at about 15 different institutions. If you went to the Lancaster Hemp Circuit, you saw another replicate that Alyssa Collins planted at Penn State. But we have Ursa Alta and Ursa Grande in all of those small plot trials around the country. So we will get very good data from our academic colleagues on the performance of those 2 varieties. Anecdotally, and Shelby Ellison is here from Wisconsin, David Gang is here from Washington State. They can tell you how Ursa Alta and Ursa Grande are doing compared with other lines that are in this trial. Just one final note about, because Sarah is raising her hand, one final note about obtaining seed. You want to order your seed as soon as possible. If you could order it now, you should do it. And you should go talk to Robin Destich from Konopny US if you want some of their outstanding varieties. You should talk to Sarah Mitchell of King's AgriSeed, who distributes international hemp and Verve seed varieties, and any others? And New West Genetics. Oh yeah, I forgot about them. Yep, just one more point here, and I don't want to forget my colleagues from I&D Hemp. They have an excellent variety here, which we've labeled SS Beta, but commercially is known as IH Williams, named after our deceased colleague David Williams from University of Kentucky. So here you have 3 excellent seed brokers to talk to if you want to order seed. Valerie, you were asking about cross-pollination. So, yeah, certainly in a breeding program, we would not grow any breeding lines in the presence of these varieties. We want isolation preferably of 3 miles to make sure that there's no cross-pollination and to maintain the purity of our varieties. That's also critical during the production of certified seed. And the rules state if you're going to produce seed for planting, you cannot have any other hemp within 3 miles to make sure that we maintain that purity. In a monoecious variety, it's most likely self-pollinated because the male and female flowers are within the same inflorescence. And obviously in the dioecious varieties, you have male individuals and female individuals. I'll just say one thing we note about those male individuals: they're very attractive to bees, both honeybees and bumblebees. So it is a good food source. Male pollen is a good food source for bees, but hemp is entirely wind pollinated. Those bees do not go to the female flowers. So, yeah, Sarah.
What are the growing conditions? Because the crop is shorter to me than in previous years. What happened this season to keep this crop short?
Yeah, you're not the only one that noticed that. Yeah, I also wonder the same thing. And what I've noticed, and this is one idea that I have, well, no idea, sorry, a hypothesis that I have, is that this field, after severe rainfall events, it gets really waterlogged. So I believe that it may have suffered from waterlogging stress, and that's why it has not reached its, very.
One side that suffers more than the other? Between these two?
I believe so. I cannot tell you, but there is another planting. I replicated this 3 weeks after, which you can see in the back over there, and those look way taller. So that field does not suffer from that waterlogging. So I would imagine that waterlogging would be the main factor why they are shorter.
What is the planting date?
This one was May 20th. That was June 13th. Yep.
Yeah, so hemp does not like to be wet, and it will stop growing when it rains and when it's, waterlogged. The remnants of, Hurricane Debbie came through and gave us about 4 inches of rain that day. And this is another sort of feature of our research fields here. You see that we maintain these 2-acre blocks, and these 2-acre blocks have been here for decades. And as we plow these blocks and then maintain driveways in between, the soil subsides and they become swimming pools. So when it rains, our fields get flooded, and you'll notice we have a 2-acre field of Ursa alta up on the hill there on the other side of the apples. And when you look at that, it is tallest in the middle, and the plants have even died around the edges of the swimming pool because that's where the water pools. So I'm actually trying to get the folks here to knock down our driveways and to just plow everything again and get rid of these driveways and level out the swimming pools that we have here. Okay, there are lots more questions you could ask, so definitely catch up to Luis or other folks in my group wearing AgriTech shirts, but I do want to give you about 20 minutes to walk through the plots and see any features that you're curious about. And then we will meet at that speaker over there at 9:50. Okay? Thanks, Luis. So one thing we've learned, and you can talk to any of the researchers here who have been trying to establish hemp in trials over the last 6 or 7 years, that it can be very challenging to get good stand establishment of hemp. It does not like to be wet. So what I always tell my folks when they're very anxious to get their research trials going is to plant after the storm. All right? I think a lot of crops you would think, oh, I want to get that seed in the ground and then it's going to rain and my seed is going to pop right up after that rain. I do not recommend that for hemp. You want to let that rain saturate the soil and then watch the soil moisture and then plant. Because when it's flooded, it will not come up. So that's one little thing to think about, is proper soil moisture and depth, and plant deep, plant down to where your moisture is in the soil. But the other critical aspect is weed management, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Lynn Sosnoskie here, who is our weed scientist at Cornell AgriTech and has been doing a lot of work on herbicide control and non-herbicide methods for weed management, and is also our state representative to the IR4 program. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and she's going to talk about a little bit about herbicides and sonolin, I think.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for coming out, and thanks for having me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've been doing through a USDA CPPM project, looking at hemp competition, hemp weed control, as well as some of our IR4 projects. So hemp in some outlets has been reported as being fairly competitive with weeds, but I think the work that we've done here is that if you don't get a good stand establishment, if the weeds get a jump on you, hemp is not necessarily going to catch up. And frankly, our work that we've been doing across 5 states in both transplanted hemp and seeded hemp really suggests that we're going to need about 4 to 6 weed-free weeks after emergence to really maximize hemp growth and yield. So I do want to point out that this is going to require integrated weed management. I think everybody knows that pesticide options are limited in hemp, and that includes herbicides. We have one single herbicide, and frankly, we are lucky to have that one herbicide for use in hemp. So I am going to point out, if you do have the handout here, I do have a link in it to a free book that you can download from the Northeast SARE website called Integrated or Sustainable Weed Management on Your Farm, Ecological Weed Management on Your Farm. It is a great book talking about integrated weed management practices. And since we only have one herbicide, I do want to start off with the integrated weed management practices that we should be engaged in, we should be thinking about when we're going to plant hemp. The first is going to be site selection. Thinking about the fields that you have available to plant into. If you have fields with really competitive weed species, really high densities of weeds, or perennial weeds like bindweed, Canada thistle, that would be a field to avoid. So being very mindful about scouting your fields, understanding what the weed communities look like. We have a couple of pigweed species here. We have our usual Powell amaranth, red root, smooth pigweed, but we also have Palmer amaranth and water hemp creeping into this state. And those weeds can grow up to 10 feet tall. Okay, so you need, if you're going to be rotating into an agricultural production field, and there could be Palmer amaranth and water hemp, that is not a field we want to be in with hemp. We don't have the options for controlling these species. They grow tall, they grow fast, and the seed production is enormous, and so those seed banks build very quickly. Another technique that we can use is a stale seedbed technique. And this is going to depend on your planting date and the species that you have there, is you can allow species to germinate and then go in and kill them, either with when they're at the white thread stage, a shallow disking. You can go in with a non-selective herbicide that you can burn them down. You can go in with a flame weeder. This is something we're doing with Crayers right now in their organic beet production, is letting the weeds get up, going in with a flame weeder, burning them off, maybe doing that 2 or 3 times before planting. So that seed bank that's already present, allowing some of those weeds to get up and then get them killed. So maybe when it comes time for planting, you are dealing with fewer weeds that are going to need to be controlled. Seed bed preparation, this is for general crop management, having a smooth, even bed. If you can plant into a smooth, even bed, you're going to facilitate good seed soil contact. You're going to have better stand establishment. Hopefully you're going to have more even germination, more even emergence and growth. And that is going to help you have a strong crop stand, because you're going to want to maximize crop vigor and stand development. Obviously, choosing varieties with high vigor, rapid growth, as is appropriate for whatever parameters you're interested in. Basically, you want to make sure that you've got a good even stand. You want to minimize the space that's available for the weeds to colonize. And then when it comes to harvest time, making sure that you're harvesting clean fields first. Do not go to your weediest field, harvest that, and then go to a field that's relatively clean. All you are doing is moving weed seed from your weedy field now to your clean field. Mike Hunter from New York State IPM, we have a separate handout, and this is just general for all your harvest equipment. It is talking about weed seed movement and equipment clean out. Please check this out if you are doing, kind of your grain, your fiber harvesting, whether you're talking hemp, whether you're talking other crops. We are moving a lot of weed seed around. We are moving a lot of problematic weeds, like the water hemp, like the Palmer amaranth. It's coming in on our equipment. And this is an easy strategy we can use to minimize the spread of some of these super invasive, super problematic species. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is going to be herbicides. Herbicides can be both in the season with that of hemp. We're going to be talking about Sonolan. Now, we do talk about if we can put hemp into an effective crop rotation. So if we can get very good weed control in preceding crops, that can help us in our hemp crop. But understand, labels have rotation restrictions on them, okay? There are rotation restrictions on the labels, and you must pay attention to them. Those rotation restrictions are there from the EPA because of residue potential. But I'm going to tell you, hemp is very sensitive to a lot of herbicides. So we got to be very mindful. We have to be thinking also of what the carryover injury could potentially be. I have looked at about a dozen plus soil applied herbicides, and I'm going to tell you what, about 11 of them have killed hemp outright. So we've got to be very mindful. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. We might get good weed control in one crop, but the rotation restrictions, those potential residue concerns, that potential injury could be an issue of rotating into the hemp year. So please be mindful. And hemp is not going to fall into a lot of those crop rotation restrictions. So it falls under the other crop category, which tends to be much more restrictive. All right, so on to Sonolan. Sonolan is our only registered herbicide. It is a supplemental label in New York State. It expires on the 1st of May in 2026. You're going to have to go to the NicePad website and download that supplemental label and have it on hand. This herbicide, ethylfluoralin, it is a yellow herbicide. Anyone who is familiar with the WSSA groups, this is a group 3. It's a dinitroaniline. This herbicide is primarily effective at suppressing annual grasses, such as crabgrasses, foxtails, barnyard grass. It may have activity against some small-seeded annual broadleaves like pigweeds, nightshades, but it is not a strong broadleaf herbicide. I do not think about this as a broadleaf herbicide. Think about this as a grass herbicide primarily. It can be applied at rates ranging from 1.5 to 3 pints per acre. I believe we've used 2.5 in our trials here. These rates are going to be dependent on your soil type. If you have a coarse soil, if you're sandier, you're going to go lower. Now, this can be incorporated 2 ways. It can be applied as a pre-emergent, so after the crop has been planted, applied to the surface, and then it's going to have to be irrigated in, or it's going to have rainfall to move it into the soil solution where it's active, or it can be mechanically incorporated, pre-plant incorporated. So Sonolan is applied, it's incorporated, you plant into it. Now, if we have done a study here on the campus, and basically we found pre-plant incorporated versus pre-emergence, we had hemp emerge and establish equally well. With respect to the weed control, this year, the pre-plant incorporated gave us much better control than our pre-emergence. We had a very dry year. So we felt that we got that Sonolan incorporated into the soil solution physically better than we would have done with the pre-emergence. The other issue we had is when that soil started to dry down, we started to have cracks in the soil, and our weeds started to come up through the cracks, completely avoiding the herbicide. This has been shown in other crops, is that where we have dry conditions, pre-plant incorporated may be more effective than a pre-emergence application. Understand, if you're going to be doing a pre-plant incorporated, this is going to be a single pass mechanical incorporation. Treflan, similar herbicide to ethylfluoralin. We like to do 2 passes. Ethylfluoralin is recommended as a single pass. If you have clumps and clods, if that soil is too wet, you are not going to incorporate that herbicide well. You are going to have patchy weed control, and you have the potential for increased herbicide injury because you'll have it concentrated in certain areas as opposed to others. I'm also going to tell you, if we get heavy rainfall and we have flooded conditions, you will get injury from Sonolan. It can do it. That is mentioned on the label. What you'll see is stubby roots. You'll see swollen, brittle stems, and you can just have breakage right there, and that'll be a problem, particularly if we get strong winds coming through. So just because this is registered does not mean it is 100% safe. You can get injury, particularly under wet conditions. Also, the injury potential is going to be increased if you don't have your sprayer calibrated properly, you're not putting it out at the proper rate, or you don't line up and you have overlapping and you're increasing the concentration of that herbicide in certain areas. The last thing I'd like to mention is I am the state liaison for the IR4. I do the IR4 research for herbicides here in New York. And I do want to just point out is that we do put hemp recommendations, hemp requests into the IR4 program. Right now we are setting our final priorities for the 2025 season. There were hundreds of requests that went in across weed science, plant pathology, entomology, and all crops. We have to narrow it down to 40. So it's hard. And hemp gets 2. But I'm going to tell you, I don't think herbicides are going to be in the program for next year for hemp. Just looking at the IR4 food requests in previous years, we've recommended dual magnum, we've recommended bromoxynil, we've recommended stinger, all herbicides that we've seen a measure of safety. And basically the manufacturers have said they're not going to support This year we recommended clethodim. It is a grass herbicide, a post-emergence grass herbicide. We heard back at this workshop the manufacturer will not support. So right now there are 2 other residual herbicides that are kind of in the mix, and frankly, just based on discussions with the weed science team, it's not looking good. There's just too much variable injury across the United States. So I want to just swing it back to what I started off with. I am not very confident about the herbicide outlook for the future, just from an injury standpoint and from a company standpoint with respect to regulations, legality, and just their twitchiness of being involved with hemp and its current regulation environment. Which means that we're going to have to be very, very, very mindful about the integrated weed management. Again, weed management in preceding crops, again, thinking about herbicide residue and injury potential from those products, and then using those alternate strategies. And I'm really very, very, very interested in doing some more tests with the stale seedbed techniques going forward next year. I think that's going to be critical.
Lynn is trying to run away before you ask any questions. Questions for Lynn?
I will say we are doing priority setting right now, and I left so I could come up here. Yeah, question.
How many varieties was the herbicide trialed on?
So that I cannot tell you right now. Here is the other problem, and thank you for bringing that up. Hemp varieties.
The pre-plant incorporation versus pre?
We have just done Bialobrzeski here. I have done other pre-emergence trials with Anka, and I'm going to tell you, seed vigor is really going to change that too, because we had some Anka that did not have a good seed vigor, and boy, herbicide injury is magnified if you don't have good seed vigor, and that crop is going to struggle to get out of the ground. Trust me, we've seen it across crops. The other thing that I want to bring up about hemp, even with the Sonaland, the label says it is not tested on all hemp varieties, and you have a lot of genetic diversity in this crop. Now, the USDA actually just published a paper on field corn and sweet corn on a herbicide that we have labeled and that we use regularly, an HPPD herbicide, and they found that there was a whole genetic background across all of our corn that's in some of the sweet corn and in some of the field corn, and it makes the varieties that were evolved from that more sensitive to this one herbicide. So that is the other issue. We can't test every variety out there. We can't test all the genetic background. So you have to understand there's always going to be that potential for injury. We think we know everything about corn. Come on, we've been working on corn forever. And we just this year discovered, a genetic element that makes certain varieties more sensitive to a herbicide that we've had registered. So just understand there's a lot in that genetic background that is going to potentially influence the safety. And so the Sonaland label does recommend testing on, small amounts of a planted crop at first, or become familiar with this in a variety that you are going to use, because there is just that potential.
Okay, last question from David.
Real quick. You mentioned mechanical incorporation pre-planting. How deep?
I believe we went 2 inches.
Oh, just shallow.
Yeah.
Shallow
This is going to be a shallow incorporation. But again, I think your soil quality is going to be critical. Again, making sure that it's evenly incorporated in that 2 inches. Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Lynn. She is a wealth of knowledge, so if you have questions about weed management, please don't hesitate to contact Lynn. And she always gets back to you very quickly. So that is a good segue, David, for my little 3-minute discussion about site preparation. So we use conventional tillage on this farm. We use relatively little no-till practices here. So all of our trials that you see here were moldboard plowed, disked, and then cultimulched, I believe, until we got a fairly well-fitted field. Then we applied the sonolin, cultimulch to incorporate it. And the latest thing that we've been doing is incorporating a rolling step. And so I learned that from my friend Corby Middeth of Konopny US, that he said in France, they roll all of their fields. And so most of these fields out here have been rolled after planting. So the small plot trial, we seeded it with our cone seeder, and then we rolled the field. And by doing that, we ensure good seed to soil contact. We get a nice level field. If we were going to do the pre-emergent application of sonolin, as Lynn said, we would have a nice level surface for that. We ensure that the seed is buried because bird predation right after planting is a huge problem. And actually, I think especially at the higher seeding rate for the fiber varieties, those birds, the doves, can pick out the rows that you've seeded at a higher seeding rate, and they will just sit there and eat all your seed. It's not a minor thing. Don't dismiss it. And then the final benefit that we see of rolling is that it pushes the rocks down. And the first year we started baling and then running bales through our decorticator, we learned that they were full of rocks. So you need to be, when we get to the raking demonstration, you cannot be too aggressive with the rake and flip rocks up into your windrows, because they will end up in your bales, and you really don't want rocks going through your decorticator. So by rolling, one benefit that we see is that you push the rocks down at least to the soil surface. So we did a little study. This field that Jacob just started cutting, that's field 20, was rolled, let me just make sure I get my notes right, was rolled before planting, and then we seeded it with a John Deere no-till drill. The farther field, the next 2 acres down, which is field 25, we rolled after seeding, because I was talking with Sarah Mitchell, and she said, oh, you can't roll after seeding. You won't get emergence.
The tractor wheels.
You've seen it with the tractor wheels. So what I saw was there was no difference in the stand count at 3 weeks, whether you roll before planting or roll after seeding. And in fact, this is our roller. We just parked it out there, so you can take a look at it. It's not going to compress. It's not super heavy, so it's not going to compress evenly across the field. But what I saw is the areas where it did compress and we had a nice, smooth, flat surface, that's where the seeds came up first, because of that seed-to-soil contact. So all of our fields around here, we grow a lot of alfalfa around our dairy farms. Those fields are rolled before planting. I just think it's probably a practice you want to think about for your grain and fiber hemp. The next thing we're going to hear about is seed treatments. So Patrick McMullen is a PhD student in Chris Smart's lab in plant pathology and has done some really interesting work, and he'll describe this trial which is behind us.
Good morning. So like Larry said, I'm a PhD student in plant pathology studying soil-borne pathogens in hemp and their management strategies. And here I conducted a small plot trial looking at fungicide seed treatments to control damping off and soil-borne pathogens. So as we've just been hearing about, stand establishment is a big concern for hemp growers. And now that we know how to perfectly manage weeds, thanks to Lynn, hopefully, another piece of that puzzle is pathogen management. So there's a number of soil-borne pathogens that hemp is susceptible to, including a number of species of Pythium that we have found here in New York. Other areas of the U.S. have reported similar findings, as well as different species of Fusarium, among other pathogens. So most of these pathogens, like cool, wet soils, like we have here in the Northeast, early in the growing season when we're planting. So as we've heard in some earlier presentations, soil drainage is super important, ensuring that your fields aren't planted in low-lying spots that flood easily. Those are great areas for pathogens to just thrive and take off. If you're planting into wet fields, the Pythium will love that. Same thing with Fusarium. They can lead to damping off, vascular wilts, and root and crown rots. So here I have been testing fungicide seed treatments in a collaborative project with both Larry's lab and Alan Taylor's lab as seed scientists here at Cornell. They thankfully treated the seeds for us. So I used several different fungicide seed treatments. There were two that were copper hydroxide products, Americop and Ultim, as well as a phosphite product and phosphorus, Prudent 44 and neutral. And then we compared these to a conventional fungicide treatment of Apron and Maxim, which is fludioxonil and methanoxam. So the coppers and phosphites are in the works of being registered for hemp, but the Apron and Maxim is not. We were using this as a research control that we expected to work well, as it usually works well on the fungal soil-borne pathogens as well as the water molds like Pythium. So these seeds were treated and then planted with a cone seeder into these small plot trials, and stand counts were collected 3 weeks after post-planting, as well as 6 weeks, and then again at harvest. This study we completed fully last year, and then replicated again this year that I'm standing in front of. This year we added an additional formulation of Ultim that isn't on the handout, but is on the field map if you're looking at that. So looking at the data from last year, we saw increases in stand counts for all of the seed treatments. Looking at the percent increase, I should mention we tested this on 2 different fiber cultivars. So there's Fiber 79 and Futura 83 that Luis talked a good bit about in our previous presentations. So we wanted to test these on 2 cultivars. And we saw numeric increases in stand count with all of these fungicide seed treatments at 3 weeks post-planting, with only significant increases of a 58% increase compared to the non-treated control in Ultim and the Prudent 44 and neutral treatments. So that's quite a large increase there, 58% compared to the non-treated. However, then when we went to the later stand count time points, we did not see significant increases, although we did still see some numeric increases. At harvest, we also collected biomass last year and saw no significant increases, no significant differences in plant biomass between any of the treatments compared to the controls. So this year we replicated that, and we are also including the same planting density as we did last year, 30 plants per square feet, which is over here on your left side, and over on your right is a reduced planting density of 15 plants per square feet. We wanted to see if, when a seed treatment is applied, can we use a lower planting density to therefore use less seed? Will that give us an economic gain that we're putting less seed into the field while increasing stand establishment? So those trials are being evaluated currently. I'm going to be collecting harvest data this coming week. So I don't have those final numbers for you yet, but all of that data should be available next summer and hopefully give us some insight into the best practices for managing soil-borne pathogens. I will say one interesting thing that I saw in this year's data was that all of the seed treatments, except for the conventional apron and maximum treatment, significantly increased stand count at 3 weeks post-planting. So these were the copper and phosphite products. However, not the conventional fungicides of methanoxam and pendioxinol. So that leads us to think maybe there's something else at play here other than just soil-borne pathogens. Maybe it's a nutritional thing that these extra compounds are helping with. We're not quite sure what's going on because we would expect this conventional fungicide to be quite effective. There's not a lot of known resistance to it, and it's effective against other soil-borne pathogens in other crops that are infected with these same species. So at this point, it looks like the future outlook for seed treatments is quite well for improving stand count, stand establishment. But we will be looking at some final data here to see differences in biomass at harvest, as well as stem diameters and plant height. So for now, some of the best practices you can do to avoid soil-borne pathogen management is really focusing on those cultural practices, right? Ensuring your well-drained fields, sanitizing your equipment, and trying to get a good stand early by planting at times maybe not right before a storm, like Larry's pointing out. Make sure you're planting in appropriate weather. So I'd be happy to take any questions you might have about pathogen management.
Yeah, I just want to confirm, Patrick, we did not apply sonolin to this field,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, so these fields were rolled post seeding, but we did not apply an herbicide.
So, yeah, this is an anecdotal observation, and again, you can talk more with Lynn about it, but when you compare our other fields and drive around and see our other fields that were treated with sonolin compared to this field, there's a lot of grass in there. So I'm pretty psyched about sonolin. Seems to be working pretty well, pre-plant incorporation. Questions for Patrick?
Yes.
Which copper?
Copper. The question was which copper. This is copper hydroxide. Both of them.
Yeah, you've been mentioning the effect of birds eating the seeds. Could it actually be that the application of fungicide is increasing the stand count because it actually makes it less attractive to the birds?
That's a good question.
Yes. So the question is, can the fungicides make can the seed treatment make the seed less attractive to birds? Yes, I think that can very well be true. We don't have data to support that. We didn't test for that in experimental design. But I do imagine that the birds are not choosing these fungicide-treated seeds. And the non-treated control was truly non-treated. It didn't have the film coat seed treatment.
These are some stem borer, Hemp like Delaware. Stem borer.
Stem borers? I have not observed a lot of that in my field. I haven't really collected insect data, but I think we do see.
But we really don't have that many stem borers here. It's not an economic problem in New York. Or grasshoppers.
For which we are thankful.
Okay, so our next series of, thank you, Patrick. Great job. We're now going to move on to a series of equipment demonstrations, and we're going to assemble, so move hastily.
Sections, material dries faster, rests more evenly, and then ultimately it takes less work on your rake and baler to be able to move that material around. Once you see the rake going through, you'll start to understand how 12-foot stalks are a little bit challenging for that type of equipment. So it sounds like the machine is getting a little bit closer to us, so I'll probably have to stop talking now. But if you look over there, you'll see the machine. travel around the country in fall, fixing equipment as necessary, working with growers, understanding more. And what you see behind us is our current generation of machine, but every year we get better. We're not a very complacent company. I get bored quickly. I like to see stuff evolve, and so we're going to continue to evolve pieces of equipment like this as the industry changes. But I also want to make people aware that while we do develop this machine, this isn't the end-all be-all of how to harvest hemp. I think that there's a lot of application for this type of machine in the country. But there's other types of implements out there that can work as well. We've developed equipment for forage harvesters that can windrow material, and then you can go back and pick that up. It really just depends on what your application is going to be, what you're going to market with, and that's what you got to think about when you're looking at growing hemp, when you're looking at processing hemp. What's the end result need to be, and then work that backwards, and you usually get to the right equipment. If you start the equipment first and work it forward, you'll oftentimes run into some bottlenecks that are really hard to accomplish. So this is just one aspect of it. And I want to thank Larry for letting us run the machine today and being a part of what we do at Bish Enterprises. And I'm proud to be a part of what people are doing here at Cornell University. Yeah, you can. Thank you, Andrew.
So you can see that on this side, I had a few more cutting issues. If you look to the other side, it's actually a very clean cut. And so crop conditions are very important for your harvest. You'll note, some of you might have noticed we were cutting a bit this morning. It was really wet this morning. It was a little more difficult than it should have been. An 8 a.m. harvest is definitely different from a 2 p.m. harvest. And this is something I've noticed with all of the fields. It's been a lot harder to harvest traveling to the north, where to the south, it's a much cleaner cut. The crop falls where it's supposed to. In this direction, it tends to get pushed, and I get a little bit more lodging. You'll notice I'm adjusting the height of the machine up and down. Obviously, you want to get as low of a cut as possible to get as much tonnage, but in some situations, you might have planted too densely, the crop might be too moist, and you have to cut a couple inches above just to keep that crop flowing smoothly. So there's a lot of in-field conditions you have to be aware of outside of the machine itself. So.
Okay, Andrew didn't mention this, and Jacob didn't mention it either, but this machine broke, what, 3 weeks ago?
Yeah, it broke as I was going to park it. I finished all my cutting, everything went well, and then I had a weld fail, and some steel just fell on the ground. So that was a bit of a repair, took me some time. We actually have the parts we could show people later if anyone wants to see that damage. But the most important thing, as Andrew said, is we do stand behind our equipment. And so I was able to make a call, I was able to get something fabricated, and I was able to have my parts in time to continue harvesting. And most importantly, to show it off to you all here today. So,
yeah, so I gave Andrew a call, and he said, yep, we're making a new tongue for you. We'll have that shipped to you in a few days. And he said, you know, normally I question the operator about that. But in this case, I guess I can't really do that.
My bad.
So again, we really appreciate the support of Bish Enterprises. And I also want to take a minute here to thank Andrew as the leader of the Hemp Feed Coalition and for all of his efforts, tireless efforts in getting that first application through. I think we're already working on the next application for beef cattle. Is that right? You want to say a few words about Hemp Feed Coalition, Andrew?
Yeah, that's one of my favorite subjects in the world. I think it's the largest opportunity to the hemp industry is to open up the animal feed market. It's going to reduce the cost of production across the board, whether you're growing for herd, fiber, grain, cannabinoids, it doesn't matter. Animal feed is going to lower the cost of production across the board. I've been involved with the Hemp Feed Coalition for going on almost 5 years now. We worked on the egg-laying chicken application for just over 3.5 years. This year, we received a recommendation from the FDA back in February. AgToGo voted in favor of this at their annual meeting in San Antonio, Texas in August. And so now the market is opened up. It's federally legal to feed egg-laying chickens hemp seed meal. It's
federally legal to have that material cross borders. No interstate commerce issues. It's not a state. It's not a state regulation. This is federal, so that's really exciting. And to Larry's point, what's next? Because we can't stop with egg-laying chickens. Although egg-laying chickens, interestingly enough, 5%, if we impact 5% of the egg-laying chicken market, that's 670,000 needed acres of hemp to be grown in the United States, just for egg-laying chickens, not broiler chickens, not roosters, just egg layers. So, what's next is beef cattle. Beef cattle and lamb are up on the docket. We think we'll have an expedited result with those. We have a tremendous amount of research data available for those. The FDA actually came to us and said that they felt that our data was sufficient enough to push an application through without any further studies. And that's really positive to have that relationship now with the FDA to move these along. So hopefully within about 24 months, maybe 30 months, we could see beef cattle approved in the United States. Beyond that, we're looking at equine. We've got some studies going on with equine and also looking at the holes and how horses benefit from the holes of the seed, which currently we don't have a market for at all. And beyond that, then broilers, we are doing some work with broilers. And as many animals as we can get studied on, we're going to continue to push this forward. So if you want to see the industry grow, contribute to the Hemp Beef Coalition. We're a good group of people. We spend all of our money on studies, on applications, and making things happen for the hemp industry. And thank you, Larry, for bringing up our work at the Hemp Beef Coalition.
And again, with generous funding from New York State, Cornell has initiated 3 animal feeding studies with matching funds from the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, so a total of $500,000. And we will do a study on dairy cows, on broiler chickens, and an equine feeding study with hemp seed meal. And we hope, again, to cooperate with IND Hemp to provide that hemp seed meal as a member of the FFAR Hemp Research Coalition. So it really is a team effort, and I'm glad we were finally able to get our animal scientists on board at Cornell to contribute to the Okay, so we've cut our fiber hemp now. The next step is to let it wet and dry. And you can go see how wet. You can walk through the field here, but I wanted to give an opportunity to our guest from Poland, Maciej Kowalski. Hopefully my Polish is somewhat acceptable. I'll let him correct his name. Who's going to talk about his experience in Poland with Redding and his company, and the potential for using hemp for textiles.
Yes, thank you. For those wondering how to pronounce my name, is Maciej. I've been asked to introduce, to share my experiences with what we're doing in Poland, which is basically a vertically integrated company which grows hemp, we harvest it, we decorticate it ourselves, we cottonize it mechanically, blend it with cotton, spin it into yarn, and make products, the end product that you can actually wear. So afterwards, or in the meantime, you can just compare that straw, which is still the same thing that Jacob just cut down, but probably like 2-3 weeks ago. And it is supposed to be retted. It is somehow retted. What I want to share about is among the 10 years that I've been growing hemp for different applications. For 5 years, I'm focused solely on fiber. And when I say fiber, when Europeans say fiber, they usually mean what you're calling bast, not herd, not the other applications. So the bast should separate easily from the herd. You can see that happening with the green one. That's why a lot of people are saying about green decortication, because you can actually get a clean strand of bast without any shifts. The problem with that is that you're actually left with 75% of water, which is the average content of water, both in fiber, in the bast and in the herd. And while it is technically speaking quite easy to separate the green bast, then you need to find an application for 75% water in the herd. Or you have to dry it artificially. You cannot dry it in the field because you won't pick it up. So what we started doing 10 years ago is winter retting, which was done accidentally by just forgetting or actually not being able to harvest 200 of our acres of hemp grown something else. What is essentially happening during winter is what happens in the very traditional method of water retting, which means allowing water to dissolve the glue that is holding it together. That's what we're doing in a dew retting. Dew retting means you actually leave it on the ground, rake it sometimes depending on the weather, and allow the moisture to aid you in separating the bast from the herd. The better you do your retting, the easier your decortication will be, and the easier decortication will be, the higher the quality of the end fiber will be. I've been traveling across the United States for 3.5 weeks now, visiting different decortication facilities, and I see not a lot of people having a full picture from the field, from the seed. There's plenty of great knowledge here about what happens at emergence rate, how to allow for the best count of the plants, but those people that have that knowledge usually don't have knowledge about processing, and the other thing holds true as well. People that are great with decortication sometimes even tell, I don't care about farming. Well, they should, because if they don't do the retting properly, they will not do the decortication properly, and if they don't do the decortication properly, the only thing they can do with the fiber is insulation. So how does it actually work? What are the inner works of our process? We are in the latitude of 55 north, which is closer to Edmonton, so upstate New York is the closest thing that I have to European conditions, to Polish conditions. And you can see the differences that Larry mentioned earlier about the maturity of the plants. Since we are not cutting down our plants, we let them die with the first frost, which comes around mid-October. So Ursa alta would be actually the marvelous plant for us because it would die off without being mature. It is obviously true that the more mature the plant is, the stiffer the fiber is. But it's not exactly about maturity itself, it's about the weight that it carries. So if it's a mature plant that went into flowering but has actually pretty small amount of grain, the head will be light and it will not go into that lignification that strongly. So we are growing, and that's something that I would recommend you to try, especially in the upstate New York, to get as late blooming varieties as possible, plant them April, May or whatever, and forget them for 11.5 months. Just, you can do pictures for your Facebook feed or whatever, but nothing else. Nature will take control of it, and actually all the water that is falling from the sky, whether it's snow or rain or dew, is actually entering the stalks, but the important part is that they remain standing. Some people call it standing retting, because if you cut it down like that and leave it until April, it will all mold. It will over-ret. Retting essentially goes from rotting. It's a form of rotting. It's actually that's microbiological processing here, right? So what we see with the crop that is left standing in a field, it gets wet and then it's dried with the wind. So it's actually a sort of water retting, but in the field. The benefits of that are you're not using any energy, you're not using any water. All the effluent water that takes all those glues, which contains plenty of nitrogen, actually stays in your field instead of polluting our rivers or whatever you do with the water from water retting. And then it's much easier to decorticate. The only thing you have to do to decorticate the fiber like that is like if I would pick up a winter retted piece of straw, I would be left with a piece of bast in my hand and all the herd will be falling down. It's no longer separated to each other. You need zero energy to separate it. So the only thing you actually need to do is to sieve it, just separate it mechanically. So how do we harvest it? Someone was saying that if we allow the males to die off in a field, then they get dry and they get entangled in a combine harvester. That's all true. With dry material, it's much more difficult to cut it with anything. So we don't cut it at all. We just rake it. Our most advanced piece of equipment is standing right there, just a regular rake. Like really the simplest rake possible. We just enter it into the standing field and it just creates a windrow without actually cutting the plants down. Two things are happening. Either the plants are being pulled off, including the piece of root that plenty of people say about this huge root system that hemp has. True, but actually the one that you're pulling out is like an inch long. It has some hurt. It has some bast fiber, which is of poor quality, but you still get it. The other thing that might be happening is it breaks at the bottom, because with all the snow that, at least in our part of the country, we are having snow in the winter, usually. With all the snow at the very bottom, the plants become too brittle. You cannot actually harvest it when it's freezing, because if it's freezing, the plants become brittle and you're actually destroying it. The smaller, the simpler, the slower the rake is, the better for the fiber. You're just making a windrow and then just baling it. The very important remark is it all depends on your processor. During the Penn State event that Lara mentioned, David Suchov gave a very important remark that it's what the farmer wants is what your processor wants. It's actually you're doing it for the buyer that is actually taking the fiber from you. So even if it's easier for you, even if it's easier for them, it depends on what sort of line do they have, what sort of bale opener do they have, and what's the end application of it. All the stuff that is being removed by rainwater, by snow, and also by water swelling. When water freezes, it increases its volume. When the water is inside the strand of bast fiber, that's basically fiber, right? But a lot of people say about long fiber, that technique is not applicable for long fiber at all. It's only for short fiber. But actually, I'm in the minority in the hemp industry claiming that there is no such thing as long fiber. There is only a bundle of fibers that might be long. Because the individual fibers, if you just separate it, and then you see those small, white, tiny things, everyone can grab a piece and look at it later. And those small, white pieces of something, those are actually hemp fibers. They're an inch long, inch and a half, and that's what you're witnessing with cotton. So we're using a cotton system, despite being a country where there is no cotton at all. So the United States has a huge industry that used to process more cotton than they do. I don't know the volumes, but basically you have plenty of equipment that might be used for cotton, which is used for cotton in some places. I've been actually in some refurbished cotton gins that are doing it. One of our colleagues, when I mentioned the winter retting process to him a year ago, now he actually did all the acres this way, and he says he's actually having a lower electricity bill because he doesn't really need to break all that stuff. The line can be shorter, because even after the most expensive decortication equipment ever, if you don't do your retting properly, you will end up with fiber contaminated with lots of herds, which might be good for some applications, but is definitely not good for textile application. For textile application, if you use the short fiber setup, which is basically opening the fibers mechanically, garnetting them, carding them, whatever you call it, you separate it into individual fibers. And where does the degumming process comes into all that? A lot of people are saying about degumming. Degumming is basically covering your mistakes at retting. That's the way I see it. A lot of people I hear now are interested in green decorticated fiber, which has zero retting, and in that case, in order to use it to anything, you need to undergo a degumming process, which is basically making the same thing that winter does for me. I'm calling it semi-degummed because it still doesn't remove all the lignins, it still doesn't remove everything, but winter-retted hemp is actually much better for textile, from my perspective, using my equipment, than anything that I've ever seen. It can be done all over across the United States, even where people don't know they did winter-retting, they did winter-retting. I've collected some samples this April from North Dakota, which is like probably closer in latitude to here, but also from California. We actually spun those fibers, despite people saying, don't take that, that's just our mistake, we just forgot to harvest it. I've seen winter-retted hemp in California, which is absolutely perfect. It doesn't look very well, like if you compare what you're seeing in the field and you compare to this, it also doesn't look very well, right? It's not what you're selling on advertisement of hemp. That doesn't really look like hemp, but, well, you also don't want to see how most of the things are being done in between. The winter retting process is something that you definitely can try in here. I don't know how I'm looking at time-wise, but probably judging by Larry's approaching me, it's probably closer to the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now, or I will be staying here until the end of the day today. Thank you.
Did you use just a standard rake and just drive it slower, or did you have specialized equipment for your harvest in, say, January or March or whenever you did it?
I don't want to use any specialized equipment because if you want to scale it up and you want to convince farmers, you want them to use whatever they have. So it was the very regular rake. One important thing is the variety, obviously. You cannot choose any. But with the rake, literally you can choose any. Actually, one of my farmers, because we grow 100 acres ourselves and we also have some farmers growing it for us, used a larger rake, and it was actually worse because with a larger rake, the force with which it was hitting the plant was bigger, and it actually it broke too many stems while it was happening, so a lot of shifts, a lot of hurt was left on the ground. So obviously I cannot achieve the speed at which the Bish brothers are doing it. That's impossible for me. I'm cutting 2 to 3 acres an hour tops. When it comes to length, if that's what you wanted to ask, the higher the better. Like, I know some processors don't want long stems in their processing because they are stiff. Like, if you want to bale something like that, if you're just gonna stand, I don't know the English word for it, but this way, and it just doesn't get up in the baler. In our case, it's already brittle, already soft, so it doesn't really matter. I'm using the bales with the whole length, which is like 15, 16 feet tall, and then it's being separated at the carding opening stage, which is basically drums with pin rollers, and whatever you have at the cotton gin can easily, with slight modification, open even the longest strands of fiber.
Question? Comment on fiber discoloration from cladosporium?
It is essentially close to black when we take it from the field, which might, it does indicate some microbial infection, you might call it, or whatever. But actually for textile production, which is our sole focus, first, when you open it up, everything goes into the dustbin. So the most problematic part of that is the health and safety of the employees actually doing that, because all that dust contains some fungi that you don't want to introduce into your lungs. But then all the mechanical processes, there are some fibers that are over-retted. When they're totally black, that usually means the strength is lower. The strength of the winter-retted hemp will be lower. But you don't actually go for Kevlar applications, you go for cotton applications. Cotton is not a very strong fiber. So the weakened spots will actually be destroyed in the mechanical processing, and then the microbiological issues will be solved when the yarn is finished and you weave it into fabric. Fabric is always being water treated. This was santorized, which is like going through the boiling water. So it's we don't really see it as an issue, except for the part of health and safety of the employee, which has to be accounted for.
Thank you.
I have just one more. I have kind of two questions. One, so does winter retting not eliminate the lignin? Is that what you're saying? And then my other question is, what do you do with the residual waste to actually take out the fibers?
Does it take all the lignin? No, it doesn't take all the lignin. You can still run it through chemical degumming and still see some delignification. But I'm not an academic. I just get my fiber through the spinning mill. We have that comfort of actually being able to run even several kilos through the whole process and see if the end result is good for me. I don't really care if there's lignin still left in it. If it's soft enough for me to wear and I'm happy with it, then I'm happy with it. When it comes to waste, there is not really any waste. Well, during the standing retting, obviously all of the fibers, all of the flowers, all of the grains falling down to the ground or feeding the birds, which actually made me thinking when during the morning presentation someone said that THC testing is happening a month before harvest. I'm harvesting in April. Does it mean I'm THC testing in March and I can actually grow high THC varieties in New York? Maybe that's also a solution for hot varieties. And when it comes to the processing stage, you get the good fiber, which goes to spinning. You got the hurt, which basically goes to any applications. Other than animal bedding, because of the microbiological issues, it has a funny smell. It smells like being in a village. Like, you know, I don't know the English word for it, but it's basically, you don't... One of the decorticators, I asked him about it, and he said they did some trials and it doesn't actually affect horses. But it's not the horses that are buying the herd, it's the herd's owners, and they don't want the smell. So it's used mostly for construction and for garden mulching. And the third part of the product stream is the dust. We just use it for composting because we're not a huge processor. We rather aim to do all the processing up until the very end stage rather than just go big and do one thing.
Do you have trouble with weed control? Like when you go to bale, is there a lot of excess grass?
There is, although it's not really associated with winter retting, it's rather with the fact that we're using EU certified ecological regime, which means we don't do anything with any other than mechanical destruction, because we are sowing early May, so we can allow the plants, the weeds to germinate, kill them off, allow them to germinate, kill them off, but there's still plenty left. Most of them die off before, well, all of them die off before processing, and the processing we're using is so mechanically aggressive that it actually reduces all of it to dust. I have zero problem with weeds in the end product. Two things that are important to mention is, like, it takes some of my nutrients, that's true, and it takes some of my processing space. If I introduce a ton into the decorticator or the processing line, and 100 kgs of that is wheat, well, then I'm running essentially at 90% of the capacity, which is a nuisance, but not really a problem. And one thing that I think Steve mentioned to me is, like, where you just have, you're just lucky with your weeds, because some of the weeds that are growing in here are actually going through all the processing lines. So it all depends on what sort of weeds are they. I don't know the Polish name for my weeds, so I wouldn't even try to translate it. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, very good.
That was great. Thank you very much, and I think we all have a goal of now coming to visit Poland. Okay, I just want to give you a couple of, again, anecdotal notes here. So this field to my left is Karmeniecta. It's an international hemp variety. I really like it. This was planted May 31st. And you see that the grain heads are, if they're not mature, they're pretty close to mature. Very similar variety offered by Verve Seeds is Jurassic. Performs very similar. SS Beta, IH Williams will also perform like this. I like all three of those. Last year we had a grower nearby harvest with a shell-borne stripper header on his conventional John Deere combine. And most of that crop went through the stripper header quite well. And we were left with a field of standing stems with nothing at the top. And I can just imagine what Maciej just described to us. You could leave those stems to winter rut. So you've harvested the grain, and then you have a field of standing stems with no foliage and no grain head at the top that should winter rut very well. So I'm going to point to Steve and my other folks who are creative engineers, and I think what we need is a straw walker combine with a shell-borne stripper header that's on an elevator that you can drive through that field and run the stripper header at 8 or 9 or 10 feet tall, capture the grain, and then let's see what quality of straw we get the next spring after we winter red it. Okay, that's my little anecdotal suggestion. Okay, so normally we would have cut this field. It would have been laying there drying and starting to ret, but because our fiber cut was broken, We didn't get a chance, so we only cut it this morning. But we wanted to demonstrate to you raking, which would be the next step. So as this dries and starts to ret, it will ret differentially. So it will dry and turn brown on the upper surface and then still be green on the bottom surface. So we need to turn it at least once, and we also need to get it into windrows so we are prepared to bale it. So we have a hay rake to do that, normal hay rake. We're going to demonstrate that. And that's all just simple farming, right? That's what any hay farmer would do, not complicated. The twist that we're adding today is as we grow this crop, we want to be as sustainable as possible. And here at Cornell AgriTech, we want to be the farm of the future. And we think the farm of the future will be at least somewhat electrified. So we have one of the first examples of an electric tractor that's on the market that we purchased. And we have Rich Wildman from AgToGo, who is now our regional distributor.
That's correct, yes.
Regional distributor for Monarch Tractor. And I'm going to call up Cody Light from Monarch Tractor to describe their technology, and then we're going to see it run.
I'll just start, but then turn this over to Cody. We're based in Rochester. This is a 100% EV, no diesel, no fuel, rechargeable tractor. It also has the ability to operate autonomously. We'll show you that later on. Cody, why don't you tell them just very briefly the background of Monarch and
So my name's Cody Light. I'm the regional sales manager for Monarch here in the Northeast, representing with AgToGo. But this tractor is really started in 2017, and the co-founders, there's 5 co-founders of Monarch that had the same vision that Larry just stated: the sustainability, cleaning, being more environmental friendly, but then taking it to another level of every farm has labor shortages. So the future of Monarch is also in the autonomy piece, which I believe that you guys will see an example of that during lunch. But the core belief of the tractor is to be fully electric and to give you that labor enhancing down the road. We're gonna have Chris drive it today, but while he's driving it, the sustainability piece kind of goes into how the tractor is designed too. The original intent was to take a utility vehicle and a tractor that came from a vineyard and kind of combine it into one. So if you look at the tractor, the front of it looks kind of goofy, right? The front of it is, I like to call it the frunk. So we give you a bed that can hold up to 220 pounds, and we give you D-rings in there to be able to strap things down and use it as a bed like you would a pickup truck or a utility vehicle. The color of it, though, at the top, that kind of sandstone, is supposed to represent sand, dirt. The blue part is the battery. That battery is 110 kilowatts, 440 volts, and that color is supposed to represent water. The dark gray is supposed to represent rock. So we take the sustainability piece all the way down to the color of that tractor. I'll be able to see that. I can see the video cameras live from anywhere in the world. I can see how fast the operator's moving. You know, if they hit something and no one tells you about it, well, I got proof now of what really happened, right? So there's a lot of opportunities within this tractor. I guess I'll leave it there. Is there any questions?
What's the weight and what's the runtime like in the battery and the recharge?
Great. So he asked about weight compared to a comparable diesel tractor. warranty, and runtime. And I'll throw off a warranty there too. So the tractor weighs about 5,700 pounds. So comparable to a similar horsepower tractor, we rate this tractor at 70 motor horsepower, 40 on the PTO. It is heavy. But when we look at that battery, so that blue part up front, if we were to weigh that compared to a diesel engine with all of its emissions and cooling, we weigh about the same. Our tractor's weighted 50-50. A typical tractor 60-40. So we put that weight across the tractor more evenly than some of the others in the industry. Runtime is up to 14 hours. So that's on a single charge. We offer 3 different chargers. We can charge that as quick as 5 hours up to 10 hours overnight to be fully charged ready for the next day. And then the warranty piece, the tractor itself is a 4-year, 4,000-hour warranty. The battery is an 8-year, 8,000-hour warranty. So when you look at longevity, warranty, what the company is going to stand behind, nothing in the industry today, gas, diesel, electric, touches this warranty that we stand behind. Yes, sir.
How does running implements on the PTO affect it?
Great question. It definitely affects it. PTO takes a lot of horsepower.
And our last demonstration is of that McHale baler, which you see up on the hill.
Well, as you can tell, not everything goes to plan. I got a very small partial bale, but if you look over here, you can see I just really jammed that right side. It's a jam I've not had before, so this is new to me. I'm going to have to take some time to clear that out. But you can see it only takes half a second before you run into a problem that might take you an afternoon to fix. So it takes a lot of vigilance when you're running this equipment. It only takes 6 inches for 2 seconds too long and you got a problem. So like everything we're doing out here, this is research. We're learning and we're going to continue to develop our knowledge. As an equipment operator, I'll continue to learn and encounter this less and less, but I can assure you I will encounter this more times in the future. So that's what we're all here to do today is learn, and now you can see some of the things I deal with, which could be immediate problems. Frankie one's a little bit more fun.
Well, you gotta have tenacity if you're gonna be in this business.
Oh, absolutely. I don't have many skills, but I got persistence.
You get lead products, but they're not a priority for us. It's actually more our CBD stuff for the medical market and our THC stuff for the market.
And that's how you make a bale.
Smell, yeah, it has a kind of a mulchy smell to it. How's this?
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.